Hello, and welcome to another week of Transforming 45. This week, I am thrilled to welcome Sara Rogers. She is Wolfmaw poet, author, creator, and enchanter, which is maybe one of the best words I have ever seen in a title. And as we were chatting earlier, I said, I wish I'd thought of that too, because it's just so beautiful especially for the work and the magic that you weave and that you create. So Sara, you and I met just like 2 weeks ago, not even really, at the Berry Women's Show. And I was wandering through the booths and I saw, this shirt. And it says, "Her light is rebellious to the rules." And it stopped me in my tracks because I thought someone just captured my entire story in a few words, and there it is, and I can wear it. That is the most perfect combination, the way that I can express my story and show up in all of the ways that I want to. It's almost like the shirt is armor. When I put it on, it's this beautiful sense of protection and truth. And I'm so grateful to you for the work that you are doing. So welcome to Transforming 45.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful that we connected that day because it was a busy weekend, and
It was a very busy weekend.
It was just
yeah,
so
it was interesting.
Yeah, it was an interesting weekend, and I love, it's my favorite part about shows, vendor shows, and is meeting, and that was such a great show because it was a women's show, is meeting women and connecting with their stories. And we had such a brief little connection there because it was busy, but it was so aligned.
Yes.
And so thank you so much for having me on Transforming 45. And I'm really honored to be here and to talk about all the things that we'll talk about.
Yes, we will. I am also very grateful for that connection. Okay. So tell me your story. How did you come to writing and weaving these magical words together?
What? It's so interesting. I always think about poetry, or I'm not always. It's always been there, but I haven't been able to articulate it until actually more recently. But poetry is really, I feel, such a generous spirit. I talk a lot about in my writing circles the spirit of poetry, because I think I see everybody as a poet now. Mm-hmm. I didn't seek out poetry, it really sought out me. However, I was surrounded by it in hindsight all the time through music. I'm a huge music person. The poet of my heart is Gord Downey. And, teenager, all the things, listening to music constantly, still do. And that was really the beginning of this poetic spirit that just offered a window into storytelling that connected with the essence of my being and my soul. And it made sense to me, even though you don't necessarily have to understand it. It's because it made sense, because poetry is the story that you articulate through your own body. It is through your own interpretation, through your eyes, through your emotions, through your experiences, through someone else's words, that offers you such a gift. So I came to poetry, writing my own poetry, really unexpected, through going through my own experiences as a woman in this world, as a mother, partner, and really seeking the affirmation of my identity as a woman in this world, as a mother, which is also like my most important role. But I took on that role so intensely that
Mm-hmm.
I lost pieces of myself in the
Mm-hmm.
process.
Yeah. Yeah. A big pause there for a minute because so many women who take on that mothering role, regardless if it's through having your own children or children who come into your life, or mothering happens in 1,000 different ways, right? But when we take on that role, however it manifests itself in our lives, the requirement, it seems, is that you give over yourself, that you become the supporting role in someone else's story. And that story suddenly is more important than your own.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, literally coming back to your story and continuing to write it is so powerful.
Yeah. And it was really a surprise, like to pick up a pen and start writing.
Mm-hmm.
Because, part of my identity too was that I didn't do that. I didn't have, it wasn't like a creative outlet that I sought, which I thought was really interesting
Mm-hmm.
to me, that my body and, the essence of, creativity came through in a way where I would go into nature and go for walks. I was
Mm-hmm.
really focused on, sort of grounding my body in this sort of upheaval of who am I? What am I here to do? Like you said, like being that supporting role for so long, and also
Mm-hmm.
supporting my husband's career as well. So the motherhood and supporting my husband's career, and then what was left over, which was like, okay, whatever's left, what do I have access to then do with my own life at the
Mm-hmm.
center of my being. And so I was focused on just grounding, and nature, again, very similar spirit of poetry. It doesn't require anything of us. It
Mm-hmm.
just requires us to be. And so I was deeply called to go sit in the forest, to go sit by the river, to go into natural environments where I was accepted and I belonged, because I felt like a bit of an outsider as my whole family is thriving and I'm lost.
Mm-hmm.
And it was through those experiences in my body that, and it started on my phone and my notes app, of hearing little things or observing nature with just like innocence of a child's eye and color, and it started to ignite my senses, and I began slowly to feel more and more alive and more in my body, and began to write. And then once I started jotting down these little lines or little verses, I could not stop.
Mm-hmm. That's so powerful when you talk about coming back to your body, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because as we are in service to others, we, take, it's like we take one step out of our bodies because we were there at one point. At one point, we lived in our bodies and they were ours and they were our own.
Mm,
And it's different for every person, but we take one step out because there's something that starts to make our body feel like it's not safe.
mm,
And for women, in so many ways, our bodies are not our own. It's like they are part of the public forum, they're part of the public space.
right.
And as we become more and more aware of that, we step out of those bodies because it's not safe.
Yeah.
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 And so much of the work is how do we get back into our bodies? Because this is the container through which we experience this miraculous, painful, confusing, brilliant life.
That's it. And that's it. And so much of our bodies are required for other people,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's through our work, through, our family life, through taking care of parents, there's a multifaceted, array of things that our bodies could be required and demanded outside of our own needs. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And in the most concrete sense of that, when you are growing a human,
Right.
right? Like your body literally is no longer your own. You're a home for someone else,
Yeah.
which is like the most incredible feat of science and spirituality, right?
Oh, it's
That
magic.
it is magic.
Yeah.
I'll never forget. I was laying on my side in bed and I looked down and my hip was no longer facing forward and it was facing out this way. And I just went,
Yeah.
whoa, like, yeah, it's the most crazy and incredible thing that happens to a woman's body.
Yes. And I
Yes.
think that's the magic of the paradox because,
Yes.
also like in our lineage, we weren't meant to do it all on our own.
No.
We lived in small knit communities. And so I think that that is the magic of the paradox. And that is what poetry offers, in such a fun, I always think it's such a fun way to play with language and words as art to understand our experiences and our story, because there can be two things that are true at the same time and yet that are conflicting. And so
Oh.
that juxtaposition of our bodies being a vessel
Mhm.
for life and also reclaiming ourselves in that space of being the creator.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah, for it to come through. And so
Yeah.
creativity was a really, I think the essence of it, the story, through which I started, was creativity was that sense for me to reclaim and birth something that was of that I could hold close to my own and didn't require anything of me outside of my body.
Mm.
If that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. I just wanted to read to you, if it's okay.
Mm.
There's a verse on one of the pages of your website that I just felt was so connected, and it is so connected to this conversation that we are having right now. So it is, you are a living blessing prayer upon the altar of breath and bone, wildly elemental, fully magic. When you are of service to this prayer, you are in service to the whole world. It gets me right in my throat. When I read it, I could feel it in my eyes, but there is something different when you give vocalization to words that have power, right? There is transformation that happens when you create those vibrations as you say it out loud.
Yes, the molecules in your body literally change, and the neurotransmitters in our brains too. Our nervous system is calmed in a way, even though it might be nervous at first. But when we speak it, or when we hear story, there
Mhm.
is a settling. Like listening to you, read that was just so settling in my body. Why we read stories to children.
Mhm.
So there is this craft of listening and speaking that creates a sort of vortex of transformation in the body. That's really, really cool.
Mhm. Yeah. So where were you when those words came to you? What were you thinking about?
Sorry, you paused for a moment. Can
Oh
you
yeah.
repeat that?
Yeah. So where were you when those words came to you? What were you thinking about, or what was your experience?
Yeah, so when I started writing, I wrote for myself, and then for a few years, not many, but I would say for 3 or 4 years, and I would write, and I had collected, and she would share sometimes on social media, and then I found a poetry group on Instagram that for National Poetry Month, which is in April, they had prompts and like write a poem a day sort of thing. And Elizabeth Gilbert shared it, and so she was involved with it. And Eat, Pray, Love, big magic, like. But Eat, Pray, Love was the first story of a woman, and popularized by the movie with Julia Roberts and everything else. But it was the first story I remember hearing as a young woman, young mother, that of a woman telling the truth about her life. And in all the ups and downs, and it was just so, she's such a brilliant writer. So I was so drawn to this poetry contest, or not contest, but this group of poets, and she started liking some of my poetry. And as silly as it sounds, that when someone else, I mean, we all want to be seen in our creative, and just for who we are, as we are in our creativity, but our creativity is our life. That is the soul and story of our everyday lives, and the most mundane magic. So not that, because I don't want it to seem like it has to be something like you have to write a book or you have to do anything. Your living being presence and is the soul of your creative life. But her liking some of those poems was very encouraging for me, and it really made me feel seen in a way, even though, I mean, I pretend that we're friends in my brain. In my mind, we're friends, me and Liz, but she's a complete stranger. But it was a validation and an acknowledgement of my voice that I don't ever remember ever feeling in my body before. And it really ignited me to want to do more, not for more validation, but more because it was an acknowledgement that I really like. I'm falling in love more and more every day with poetry and the transformational effects that it has had on my life. So in that span of 2020, when COVID hit, I was accepted into this anthology, Pivot and Pause, which Liz wrote the introduction for. And it contains poems from women all over the world during the pandemic. And it was put out by Azure Antoinette, who is a friend of Liz. They collaborated. Azure did all of the intros to all of the chapters, and it's a collaboration of mostly women poets from all over the world. So I was so thrilled and honored to be a part of that, and then started putting together some poems for Elemental Magic during the pandemic. And so going back to your question, my apologies, Lisa, was where that poem began was a girlfriend of mine when we first had our first lockdown in March 2020, said, maybe now that you have some time, you should put together some poems for a book. And the whole idea just seems so abstract and so too big and too this and too that. And but again, that little encouragement was, I just started putting some poems together, digitizing some of the poems that I had in my journals or, on napkins. And I just started slowly, piece by piece. And when that particular little verse kind of came through was after months and months and hours, thousands of hours, putting together the Elemental Magic. When I was creating the final manuscript for it, I was really wanted this to be an offering that someone could open and see themselves within it, that they weren't my words. They didn't belong to me. They belonged to the hands and the hearts of the readers who found this book by chance. Well, there's never by chance, but through, those synchronicities of listening within, that they would find this book, and that it would be something of a friend. And so when I was thinking about that little opening prayer came to me, and I wanted it to be the first thing when you crack open the book that a woman read. I actually do little gift wrappings with my books, and I created a stamp with that little verse on it so that it would be right there for the woman to read. or man.
Yeah.
I write in a lot of feminine pronouns, but it's not written for any gender specific
Mhm.
person. But yeah, that's where it came from.
It's really beautiful. And when you're talking about writing from the feminine pronouns, it's because we write from our own experience, right? That's when it's
Yes,
most
absolutely.
powerful. I can write really authentically from my own gaze, from my own viewpoint. And that's the power of story, is that you read from a perspective that is outside of your own, that gives you the opportunity to look through the lens or the mirror of that person's experience. And that's why, it's one of the, I get frustrated. I live in a house of men who I love dearly, and they are wonderful, and they listen and they learn. And
Yeah,
yet, when I talk to them about authors that they read, creators that they ingest,
yeah,
musicians that they listen to, it's almost always men.
yeah,
And that's part of the reason why there's such disconnect, right? Like, women generally read from a wide variety of
yeah.
gender spectrum.
Influence. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And part of that is because it's forced upon us, right? There is way more content created
yeah.
from the masculine, especially in the everyday vernacular, right? Common media.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things I really love to do is to dive into the female voices, especially women of color from
Yeah.
like early 1900s, late 1800s, because the words that they are speaking, I mean, it takes a lot of courage to use your voice and creativity anyways in the world, especially if there are points of oppression, but
Hmm.
for to try to understand the context of just maybe 2-3 generations ago of women, and
Hmm.
using their voices and self-publishing. Many early female poets were self-published, or never published, like Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson's work was not seen until after her death, when her sister found boxes of her loose leaf paper poems under her bed. So to try and try to dive into the essence of a poem from a woman of that time is it's incredibly empowering and
Hmm.
transforming to let those words land in your body, um, from that perspective.
Hmm. Because we still hold that generational trauma,
Mm-hmm.
right? Part of our mission at this phase in our lives is to work on transforming that generational trauma that we have brought with us to
Yeah.
this phase. So, yeah, listening to those voices and realizing the common threads that continue from hundreds of years ago
Mm-hmm.
to where we are now, and some of the real challenges that we're facing, um, in terms of the rollback of women's rights, in terms of the advancement of the oppression agenda in so many ways.
Mm.
You know, when we just to get circle back to that idea of the power of story,
Yeah.
and being intentional about looking for experiences and voices that are different from your own, because we tend to look to voices that sound like our own, that feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But the only way, and it's the power of the written word,
Mm-hmm.
is when we sit and listen to and try to experience a perspective that is very different than our own. So that the voice of the Black woman,
Mm-hmm.
um, I, I live in small town Ontario. There's not a lot of diversity, and it's easy to stay
Yeah.
in my own experience. But the only way to learn and understand the depth of how oppression plays out in our society every day is to listen to those voices.
Yeah. And what a gift. Like, what a
Yes.
gift to I'll just, for any listeners, I would highly recommend, and I'm not an expert in poetry by any means, or I just I study it. I'm interested
Mhm.
in it. So I really love to explore poets from all walks of life, all different continents. I look for books with translations. I discovered a Japanese poet that I love. I have, but one poet in particular that I would highly recommend diving into her work in particular, and it's escaping my mind the name of the poem, but it is a famous quote saying, Audre Lorde, who said, "Poetry is not a luxury." And I loved her
Mhm.
poetry calls to the urgency of our stories and our creative life to transform our world, ourselves,
Mhm.
our relationship with ourselves, each other, this planet, and because it demands of us a political opportunity to name the oppression and
Mhm.
to imagine and dream what breaks through those barriers. It's incredible work. What a gift she is. And there's
Mhm.
many other Black women poets. Um, the names are escaping me right now, but yeah, to explore some of those voices will change your life. Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
And as you were saying that, it brought me back to this shirt, her light is rebellious to the rules, because the beauty of poetry is that there are no rules, right? We get to break all of those very colonial, very patriarchal structures that exist around written language.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
And,
that's what,
and
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
because language is it's so pervasive
Yeah,
everywhere, right? Like
yeah,
that is how we communicate with each other. But there are very specific ways that language is used to oppress.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
yes.
yeah, go
Yeah, and
ahead.
I was just going to say there is a chapter in my book. So, Elemental Magic, Poetic Chapters of Wild Self Love, it goes through all the chapters are connected to elements, with the fifth element being magic, which is the soul, the spirit, that essence of the mystery of life. And in writing, like I said before, I didn't write the poems for the book. I wrote them for me. And one of the ways in which I did that, which connected to I ended up creating a chapter in the fire element, um, which is all about transformation.
Mm,
And that is about within myself, within my own consciousness, through poetry, is deconstructing the paradigms of oppression, of all, in all the ways, as a settler, as a white woman, as a woman of a certain amount of privilege and class and status and being cisgendered. There is an essence in that chapter, and it was a hard chapter to share because it was so vulnerable, but it
mhm,
was also important for me because if we're going to do the work, if we, especially as women, like as mothers, caring about that every child has a breakfast to eat, a lunch
mhm,
and a dinner, and a warm house and shelter and food, and every woman is safe in her body, whether she's at home or she's walking on the street, or is just safe in the world, is to deconstruct these paradigms of the patriarchy, of racism, of colonialism,
mhm,
gender inequality, sexuality, and in a way that someone else could be like, okay, like maybe that might ignite somebody else's consciousness to start to maybe just question. And I think it can be that as soft as a question, or not even just a question, but an imagination of what else is possible, if that makes sense. and
mhm,
and poetry and creativity allows you to then dream outside of what the reality is, or what the current thought pattern is or belief, to think what else is possible. There's this essence and generosity of possibility that is limitless, and I think that that's why art and poets of past moons come into our world or our atmosphere or our sphere of influence at a certain time to drop that one phrase, her light is rebellious to the rules, or for me, it was being a 15-year-old, kind of punk teenager listening to Gord Downey's Wheat Kings talking
Mm.
about the David Milgaard story and being wrongfully convicted. There's certain that led me down, a certain path towards social justice, that there's certain things or lines that are dropped into your world that stick. They
Mm-hmm.
stick to your bones because it's a reflection of truth that to be truth, whether through your story or the story that you imagine that you're going to be leaving. Like, we're visiting here for just, hopefully a
Mm-hmm.
long time, but we're visiting this earthly place in this body. And sometimes those lines, or that word that sticks to your bones can change the trajectory of where you're going, um, in a way that feels like the truth of who you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. My first experience with that was, um, I often describe, if my cells were to sing a song, if you could listen to them,
I love
it would be Closer to Fine by the Indigo Girls. And that song was played for me. I used to sing in a group of musicians, and they strummed the first couple of chords of that song, and I said, "What is that?" And they said, "You've never heard this song?" I was like a decade younger than most of them, and I said, "No, I have never heard the song." And they were like, "Well, let's do this." So they played that song for me. It was through these people who I loved deeply that I heard that song the first time, and it was like every word, every lyric in that song just landed in all of the different parts of my body that needed to
Yeah.
hear
Yeah.
those words and that story, and the strength of these women and these female voices who are truth tellers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is the word. When you were talking about Elizabeth Gilbert earlier, that's the word that came up for me as well, is that she is a truth teller.
Yeah.
And that's why her reinforcement of your work is so
Yeah.
powerful, right? It's
Yeah.
not the celebrity, it's not the bigness, it's not the movies.
That's right.
It's that she was so vulnerable in telling the truth,
Yeah.
that her light lit the way for
Yeah.
you, for me, for all of us who need her light in the world.
Yeah.
And when you have that kind of connection, whether you know that human or not, there is a love bond and connection that happens. So I understand that, like, I love her too. She is also my best friend.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, we're all besties.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. And I love, and I think what is so powerful, I think, to like thinking about a woman's story, transformation, all the stages that we go through within ourselves, and what's demanded of us, or what we give of ourselves, and that what we try to reclaim, is that our truths can change, and there is so much freedom in that. Another brilliant writer, truth tellers, is Glennon Doyle, and
Mhm.
looking at both her and Liz, their stories and how their truths have changed, and they've given themselves permission. And my shirt is a quote from Elemental Magic. Shamelessly, she believed she was worth loving her own story. And
Mhm.
I think stories change. Stories have to change. Everything
Mhm.
that I've been saying about poetry and opening up to possibilities of the stories, that what was and then what could be, is that for a woman to allow her story to change, her body to change,
Mhm.
your friends sometimes change, your sphere of influence changes. I think to be open to that vulnerability of, again, in reflection from the earth, from the elements.
Mhm.
Every element is a way of transformation. And water shapes are shaping the earth, the wind, the transformational power of fire, and, the earth changing in that cyclical way. And as a feminine
Mhm.
being in a feminine body, we are natural cyclical beings. And so I think that truth telling, while it is just, it's so pure, it's also constantly evolving.
Mhm.
And and I think, for me, the elements and the relationship to the natural world is that reflecting back to me, the poetry of the earth reflecting back
Mhm.
to me, is that reminding me of that it's safe to change, the vulnerability of the elements,
Mhm.
um, within myself. And it's been a real trust building practice,
Mhm.
through my poetry and creativity, and and moving on to the phase that I'm currently in.
Mhm. What you said right there about trusting the cyclic elements,
Yeah.
it is so powerful when we put our trust in that, right? That we live in a very seasonal climate where our weather and our seasons change, and my being is so connected to that. I feel like a different person in each season. But trees show us every year how to let things go,
Yeah.
and that it's okay to die.
Yeah.
It is okay to die and to let things go, because that, and to go through periods of rest.
Yeah.
And that's what winter is, right? It's that deep period of rest where
Hmm.
we have bloomed and we have shone in the sun. And then we went through the shedding process
Hmm.
of letting all of that go and then having deep rest, so that what's meant to come through next has space and has a place to come through in a healed way, which,
Yeah.
yeah. And it brought me back to that line on the last line of the stanza there, her own story.
Yeah.
And that word own, because I think so much of the change that we experience is that we start out with someone else writing our story.
Mm.
Someone else is writing our narrative. And when we go through that healing journey, we realize, no, I am the author of my own story.
Yeah. And, thank you for pointing that line out, because, you know, there is a reclamation of claiming, because we're so, our culture is like, it's really good at riddling us in shame.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why shamelessly, I really wanted to put that in there. This, you know, I don't remember exactly, it's a part of a poem. I don't remember exactly when I wrote it, but because, our bodies, money, food, this mistake, that mistake, our stories
Mm-hmm.
we've been told are shameful, that we're shameful,
Yes.
what our bodies do, that our bodies bleed, and then when our bodies decide not to bleed, like, what does
Mm-hmm.
that mean? Does that mean, like, all these meanings that are, sort of, splattered across, like, our awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is something to claim your own story and to be proud of it. And, whether it's the ups and downs and all the things. Actually, I have a poem I wouldn't mind reading.
Please. Yes.
And, this I pulled a couple for today, but one in particular, um, that jumped out, and I'm not sure, maybe there's someone listening that needs to hear it, um, but just on all the ways that we've been told, um, of our inadequacy. And so, there's something to be said when a woman can come to the possibility, of being vulnerable enough to love her own story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a big deal. So this poem is called Named, and it's in the chapter called The Mystery, which is in the magic element. Close your eyes. Do you see the liquid sunshine pouring through rivers and streams, connecting, intertwining, and working together to course life through your veins? In a flow coated with frequency, charted in stars, you were named. Named of creation, named of universal love, named of elemental magic, named of alchemical elixirs, named of quintessential oracles, named of an algorithm of sensory motion. With an immaculate heart, you combusted into embryo. Fireworks of stardust and lightning, you shook the womb of your grandmother's grandmother's grandmother. Sentient mystery, you are the blind wish of eternity. Your name was spoken. Through your own throat will you match the Maker's prayer of the core bass note that sung you here. Chaos has an epitome of its own goddamn metronome. No composer, you are the sound wave. No sheet could ever read you the music to your life. So don't spin the maze this culture is spinning you. Listen to the labyrinth that is you. No goblin king ever had power over you. Walk slowly and run. Stop convincing yourself to anticipate your arrival. You are creation's muse. You have long begun. Your wild and beautiful life is now. Don't miss it. Don't miss your name.
To get myself together there after that dissolving through those beautiful words. And there it is, right? The power of story and of words and of expressing what this one body is not able to express.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I just paying ode to whatever poetry is, whether it's prayer, whether it's music, whether it's, the sound of trees breathing, the shape of stars, the heartbeat of a river. It is some sort of affirming place within every breath. I believe that there is a universal language that is something poetic. I wrote in the back of the book in my note to readers, I wrote, what do I know but that I am here and I feel things sometimes, something that's poetic, elemental, and magic. Sometimes I think I feel myself and I hear love. And I really believe that love's language lingers on the edge of poetry. I don't think that it can ever fully be expressed, but poetry attempts to put sound to the inexplainable.
I love that. Put sound to the inexplainable. And I wonder if part of that comes from the rebelliousness of poetry. Because language in so many ways seeks to bring everything to the cognitive, to the brain, to keep everything here and disconnected from our feeling selves. Right, which is where the truth, that's where our truth lies.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think you bring up such a good point. We've been talking about the body, and that's really, I think, where poetry, comes from. I think that there is a mystical sort of spirit to it, but I do think that there is a groundedness of matter, like, leaning up against a tree or listening, sitting beside, the river, that there is an essence of matter. It's almost like this bridge of the sentientness of what that is. Who knows? It might be
Mm-hmm.
different for everybody, I'm sure. But there is a sense of the physicality of um, that spirit, I think, of creativity that does come through. One of the first poems of the book, and Threading Soul Skins, in the chapter of magic as well, is a poem called Listen. And it's stories are heard through the soul, a warm and familiar place within. How we carry each other's story is a unique and sacred journey, one that connects us to what we are seeking and healing together, maybe the place of enough within. And I think that that speaks to the earth as well, and why the earth or nature seeks for us to pay attention. And a lot of poetry is just paying attention to the senses that are born out of the body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's that connection to the sensory, I
Yeah.
think, that is so deeply powerful, because as you start to speak, like within the first three words of each poem, I can feel that emotion coming up from my heart and coming out through my eyes.
Mm,
And it's the weight. When you spoke about matter, those words hold weight. They have an energetic resonance that
mm,
allows me to not just read the words on the page, but to feel the words in my soul.
yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. What a beautiful description. I love that. And they do, the essence of, you know, how something affects you. And you could be crying,
Mm-hmm.
not even knowing why. When I hear certain music,
Mm-hmm.
usually it's in a language I don't know, or words I don't understand. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't even matter, because I'm moved by it. That
Mm-hmm.
emotional, that water element is transforming me and working me. And I think where the pain and the discomfort lies, or where I felt it through my experience, is denying that. Is,
Mm.
swallowing. For many, many years, I
Yeah.
couldn't cry. Like, I didn't cry I can't even imagine. I was just saying to my daughters and my husband at the dinner table, I think I'm due for a good cry. Like, I feel it. It's been a
Mm-hmm.
while. Like,
Yeah.
and I've denied my body that cyclical, natural, elemental release, or
Yes.
just even not even release, but just of a way of being. Because,
Mm-hmm.
I think all the things that we do to, in this culture, to prevent periods, and that may be for
Mm-hmm.
medical reasons. I'm not talking about that, but just
Yep.
because they're inconvenient and whatever else, because we're not adapt to relate to our instinctual animal like intuition, that of how we are made of the elements.
Mm-hmm.
Like rage, I think, is another one. I think, grief and weeping and crying was a huge thing for me. But
Mm-hmm.
also rage, like the sacredness of rage, of like that explosion.
Yeah.
Usually I feel it in my heart space. And there's been, studies, I don't know, that when women hold back and hold anger into their bodies, it manifests as something. I don't
Yes, it
know
does.
exactly what, but I do think that when we're so wound and tight, that we're not tapped into that elemental part of us, through the earth of our bodies, through, the air of our voice and our breath, or the
Mm-hmm.
fire of our hearts and our emotions and rage. And water as in like the sacredness of our womb, and also of our emotions. I think that was really the unearthing for me through, the creativity of the written word and literary art, that I was able to tap into that and reflect back to me what I was writing as a
Mm,
reminder. And that's why I made the apparel line. That's why I made the merch. So that, like, it's so wonderful and exciting for me to see those couple words strung together, threaded together in
mhm.
combination, that reflected a truth within you and affirmed an experience within your body, and then to wear, like you said, like the resonance of those words against your heart, against your
Yes.
chest, on your back, against your spine, just hope that, it would resonate to help someone just walk a little bit, taller in a sense, or, just to feel a little more seen in a world that is so busy.
Mm,
And that's where the extension from the book sort of came from.
yeah. Well, I want to thank you because you did exactly that for me. Your words and your poetry create the most beautiful containers to hold all of the emotions that I experience and that I know that we all experience. And that is what we need, right? Are those spaces where we can just lean into it and let all of the things that we feel out, and to know that someone else is having the same experience is what begins to heal.
That's it. We're not alone.
We are not alone.
No.
All of our light is rebellious to the rules. All of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Break the rules and watch the world change.
Oh,
Absolutely.
yes.
Thank you
Okay.
so much for having me. I'm so grateful we connected, and it's just
Ew.
been really great to talk about all the things. And I'm so glad no we'll connect again. But I'm really happy that we were able to have this conversation.
And I am so grateful to you for sharing your wisdom, your creativity, your enchantress magic. It has been a beautiful connection. And when we're done, I am going to go and have a good cry
Yes.
in the best possible way.
Yes. Yeah, I might too. It's coming. I can feel it. I can feel it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Bye.